Welcome to the Base Talk podcast. I'm your host, Jacob Billingsley, owner and founder of Base Sports Performance in Hernando, Mississippi. In this first ever episode, we're going to talk about what Base Sports Performance is, the background of how it was created and how it was founded, and how we can help your athlete reach their goals. Welcome to the Base Talk podcast. This is something that I'm pretty excited about. This is something that I've been wanting to do for a while. I think this is going to be a really, really good avenue for us to kind of educate our athletes and parents, as well as kind of just to provide some context around what it is that we do at Base Sports Performance, what we focus on, how we can help. Obviously, this episode is going to be about the background of Base Sports Performance and its beginning, how everything began. So everything starts, in my youth athletic career. So I'm from here in North Mississippi, from Senatobia, went to Magnolia Heights, played, multiple sports growing up, but my senior year ended up going baseball only. Ended up playing baseball at Mississippi State University for 5 years between fall of 2013 and spring of 2018. Went to the College World Series that last year in 2018, and then was drafted by the Houston Astros in the 2018 MLB draft. Played with them in their minor league system for just a few years. And during COVID is actually when I was released of my contract. So, we get sent back home during spring training of that 2020 year, which is early March. Obviously, as you all know, that's when COVID hit. So we get sent back home. I'm at home, training myself, trying to keep up, keep my arm in shape, keep my body in shape, continue to build my body to get ready for that season. And, I'm training all March, all of April, all of May. And again, we're still kind of waiting to see when the callback date is going to be. And right at the very end of May 28th, I get a call, and on my Apple Watch, it pops up a Houston, Texas number. So obviously, when I see Houston, Texas pop up on the Apple Watch, I knew what it was immediately, right? Because at this point, all of these teams were releasing a ton of players because they're starting to realize that they're, responsible for paying their wages, their dues, when their teams aren't bringing in any money. So, we're seeing this organization is releasing this amount of players. This one is releasing this amount of players. So, when you get a call from Houston, Texas, and you're with the Houston Astros, you kind of know, what's coming. So answered the phone call. And, it was a, a person that I had never talked to before. It was just a front office person that was just doing their job. It was the conversation was pretty much as simple as, hey, is this Jacob Billingsley? Yes, it is. Just letting you know you're being released of your contract due to COVID. Do you have any questions? And obviously, there's not a ton of questions that you can have at that point. So I was like, no. So, and that was pretty much the extent of it, right? So, following that, I did get several offers for independent leagues and international leagues and things like that. But I knew, that following my playing career, that I was going to want to start a development training program, a development company for athletes. And the reason is, from between my high school and collegiate years, in high school, I worked hard. I always worked hard. I would go, to the local commercial gym before school, maybe 3 days a week. And I would go in and do things that I thought, I was supposed to be doing. So I always worked hard, but I didn't work smart. And that's because I wasn't educated. I didn't know what I should be doing. And, when I thought I was taking care of my body, I was actually probably digging some deeper holes in some parts of it. So between, high school and college is kind of when I started, my first few years of college. It's kind of when I started to fall in love with development, because again, from Senatobia, small private school, you go from a small private school to, Mississippi State University, who in that exact same year went to the national championship series, and, they ended up losing to UCLA. But, I'm coming in that fall. So I'm coming in the fall of 2013 to hypothetically the second best team in the entire nation, So you could obviously say that I was behind, right? I go from a private school to the second best, college in the entire nation, and I'm behind physically, skill development wise, right? So, I get there and I end up redshirting my first year. So redshirt my first year, and we're strength training maybe 4 or 5 days a week, trying to build my body up for that second year. And long story short, go through a couple injuries. I end up getting able to pitch a full season around my junior year. But between those years, when I'm going through rehab and I'm going through, these daily prescripted exercises and mobility drills and strength routines and throwing programs, I fell in love with development. I knew once I got through that there was an actual system to it, right? And like in high school, I was just going with the flow. Hey, it's baseball season. Let's start picking up a ball and start playing catch. Let's start swinging the bat. Let's start running some bases, right? But there wasn't an off-season plan. There wasn't, a base sports performance where you can come and get a fully customized plan built for you. So, when I started getting that in college, that was when I really, really fell in love with development. And I knew that following my career, that was what I was going to do. So, once my career ended, in early summer, late spring of that 2020 year, that's what I did. Within like a week of being released, we drafted and started an LLC that was called Billingsley Sports Performance. So, I had several youth athletes and high school athletes that I was working with, both from pitching development, throwing programs, and strength training. All of them were pretty much one-on-ones at the time, and I knew that I was going to want to start to run groups, really just because of the community. I had been obviously training collegiately and professionally in groups and teams, and I knew what it was like to be able to push other athletes and get pushed by other athletes. From a development standpoint in the gym, you're going for, a certain vertical jump, or you're going for a certain, amount of weight on a split squat or something along those lines. And it was fun to have that community, that team aspect around you. So I knew that when, I began this company that I was going to want it to be in groups. So that's what we did. We started an LLC, and it was called Billingsley Sports Performance. And I ran that from June all the way through the end of August. So June, July, and August, we ran it for 3 months. And about 6 weeks in, about that mid-July, is when I realized, hey, what you're doing is really good. We're picking up steam. We are helping a ton of athletes. We're seeing a ton of progressions. We're tracking everything. We're tracking their body weight. We're tracking their fastball velocity. We're tracking their strength numbers and their power numbers and things like this. So I'm seeing progression. All of these athletes are seeing progression. I'm super, super fulfilled by having, a little bit of, help with these athletes' careers, right? Like, obviously it's not my career, but me helping them with a plan, it was clear that they were progressing. So that was really, really fulfilling for me, because I knew, at that age, that was something that, man, I would have killed for, and my parents would have killed for as well. And it just wasn't an option at the time. But about 6 weeks in, I realized what you're doing is great. But if you want to do it to the scale that you want to do it, as far as quality of the programming and, learning more, I knew that just from the schooling that I went to in college, I did kinesiology and psychology, and yes, you go through some classes, you learn, adaptations and things like that. But, most college students that are looking to do strength and conditioning, or, exercise science, or, physical therapy, or something along those lines, they get to do an internship, right? There's a certain amount of internship hours that they have to get in order to complete their degree. And, as a student athlete, we didn't get that option, right? Like, you're a student athlete, which means it's a full-time job as an athlete. And on top of that, you have, a workload, a curriculum, in the classroom, but it was a full-time job. So there was no, taking 3 months to go learn from someone. So I knew that if I wanted to be able to offer the quality of training that I wanted to and that I was capable of doing, that I needed to go learn from somebody. So I went down to South Florida, in Jupiter, Florida, West Palm Beach, and took an internship at a private gym called Cressy Sports Performance. And Eric Cressy is the head strength coach of the New York Yankees. He's the major league strength coach, as well as, helps with all of the setup and development of the minor leaguers and things like that. And he had a private facility both in Massachusetts and South Florida. So I went down to South Florida to learn from him and to work from, that team. And I was lucky. I had some help getting that internship. Some coaches with the Astros had some connections with him, and they were able to kind of help, put my name in the bucket there in order to get selected for that. And, I was down there September, October, November, and December. So I was down there just a little over 4 months. And this is the type of gym that, Cy Young winners are coming to. It was, Corey Kluber and Max Scherzer and Noah Syndergaard and Justin Verlander and, Michael Wacha. And these guys were in there daily, and we as interns were in charge of helping them with their programming. So, we were coaching them. We were helping them daily through their throwing programs, through, their strength programs, their conditioning, their arm care, their mobility. We were helping them daily. So obviously that was an awesome place for me to learn a lot of the details and, and get hands on with some really high level athletes, especially the type of athletes that I knew I wanted to work with, an overhead population. And, that was really, really big for me to kind of get educated, right? And to get hands on and it be actually practical and not just, reading a book or watching videos or whatever. It was me actually getting hands on with someone else's system, someone else's, programming and coaching details and things like that. So that was awesome for me to be able to, pick and select things that I liked and I knew that I wanted to use in my business. And, when I came back, I decided to change the name to BASE, B-A-S-E, BASE, instead of Billingsley Sports Performance. And really the reason for that was because I knew that I did not want the company to be about me. I wanted it to be, about our community of athletes and our community of coaches. And I didn't want it to be about one person. So, I took my name off of it for that reason. And I think it's been one of the best decisions that I've made because we have such a strong, foothold in the community now as the experts in sports performance and, pitching development and, return from sport injury and things like that. So that's been a no-brainer, and I'm really, really excited and glad that, we made that decision. So a couple of the main offerings that we offer. So we have what we call sports performance, and the reason we call it sports performance and not necessarily strength and conditioning is because our goal is not necessarily just to increase strength numbers. Yes, that's a large part of it, but we're not necessarily searching or looking for, 1 rep max increases. That's not our main goal. If you want to go powerlifting or, something along those lines, like, yeah, obviously that's their goal. That's their sport. But our sport is not in the weight room. Our sport is on a field or on a court. And we need to train these athletes to perform at their sport, not just to get, a better 1 rep bench or squat or deadlift, right? So that was really one of the big things that helped us in the beginning, is because we could relate and say, look, man, you going from a 350-pound back squat to a 390-pound back squat is not necessarily going to help you with your fastball velocity or help you with your, vertical jump from a volleyball player or basketball player or something like that. If you're a little bit, weaker and you're on, an earlier training age, yeah, going from a 100-pound dumbbell goblet squat to, maybe like a 145-pound split squat, being able to put more force through the ground, unilaterally is going to help to an extent. But once you get, to a certain level of strength is no longer really the low-hanging fruit as far as sports performance concerned. So the main thing there is that whatever you need individually to perform at your sport, that's what we write our programming around, right? If we have an athlete that comes in that's already really strong, yeah, we're going to maintain the strength, but that's not going to be the main focus. The main focus might be, mobility if their mobility is lacking, or power if, they're able to produce force, but they're not necessarily able to produce force quickly, right? So we take each athlete's individual needs and then we program for that depending on what they need. So that's the main reason there for sports performance and why we call it sports performance and not strength and conditioning. And that's really our main offering. We do that we have middle school group, which is, 10 years old through 14 years old. Then we have our high school group, which is obviously, 15 through 19 years old. We have a big collegiate group that comes in the summers and the winters when they're on their breaks. We've had anywhere from, 25 to 35 athletes each session there. And we obviously we foresee that to continue to grow with, the amount of high level athletes that we have in our high school groups now. Obviously they're going to move up to the collegiate group. And then we also have a professional group. We have 6 to 8 to sometimes, 9 or 10 professional athletes as of now that are training with us in their, major and minor league off seasons. Professional baseball players primarily is what we're working with professionally. Obviously, we would be able to work with, other sports, but that just happens to be, what we have in our area. And those are our main age groups for sports performance. We also offer personal training and small group personal training for adults. So obviously personal training is a one-on-one environment, and small group personal training is just that, right? We're in a smaller group. It could be anywhere from 4 to 8 people in that group, but each of those adults has their own program. So it's a personal training, but obviously at a more cost-effective rate in a small group. And that seems to be really, really interesting, and that helps a lot of people. And again, it's one of those things that builds community. You still get what you need from an individual standpoint as an adult, but you're also building community in that small group. So that's really fun as well. And then we have our pitching group. So with all of those sports performance offerings, if you're a baseball player, we also have an add-on that's a pitching or throwing program, right? So we have had catchers and shortstops and outfielders that have wanted to build arm strength, and we can help them through that with a throwing program. Obviously, our pitchers, we go through pitching drills and throwing programs and bullpens and pitch design and things like that for our pitchers. And we also do return from injury, so currently we have, maybe 3 or 4 athletes that we're working with. They had a surgical intervention that, a couple of them had UCL reconstructions, and, we're helping them back through their throwing program with that. Obviously, they're still doing their physical therapy at a physical therapist, but then we are also helping them with their post-PT strength training. So we're doing, strength training as well as their, throwing programs to return from that injury. So, we have a few offerings there, but, those are really the main 3 is our sports performance for athletes, is personal training and small group personal training for adults, and then throwing or pitching development for, baseball players. So those are the things that, we offer, and things that we're really passionate about. And we've been very, very lucky to, have been able to put a really good team around those. We have several full-time coaches that, are rock stars and have all played and coached at a high level. We'll cover that in another episode and kind of introduce those guys and their backgrounds. But that's kind of the background of base sports performance. It started, in my early athletic careers when I started to realize how much I really, was passionate about development of the athlete. And then it grew into, just education for myself, kind of learning more and more about how we can help athletes, and making adjustments along the way. And, now we're on year 3, technically with base, probably around year 4 with it total, with Billingsley Sports Performance, and then the name changed to base a year later. So, we're still relatively young, and we've been able to see a ton of progress and reap a ton of benefits so far for these athletes. So it's really, really exciting, and we're really enjoying it. So that's going to conclude the first episode of the Base Talk podcast. Just want to kind of give you guys a background of base and how it began. Thanks for listening. Please feel free to share. If there's anybody, that you think could benefit from these episodes, please like it, please share it, please subscribe to our channel. We hope to provide a lot of education and value in these episodes. Thanks for listening.